Salt. So many different kinds. Does it even matter for your health? We're going to talk about it today. Welcome to Talking with Docs. I'm Dr. Brad Wiening.
And I'm Dr. Paul Zausel. You are salty today.
I am. We're going to be extra salty. We're going to find out if it even matters. So, okay, there's a zillion kinds of salt, but really I would say there's like 4 kind of main types of salt.
And they all sort of centered around sodium chloride, right?
Sodium chloride, the NaCl.
Na, sodium, group 1 on the periodic table, alkali metal.
Nice.
Joins with group 17 chloride
Nice.
to make NaCl.
Very nice.
Can't live with it, can't live without it.
And so early on, I would say that most salts are mostly made of salt. So
Sodium
some of them have different trace minerals like potassium and magnesium, but generally speaking, they're all in the 97 to 99% sodium chloride range.
Right.
Okay, so let's start at the most common one, so table salt. So table salt is a highly refined version of sodium chloride, like 99% sodium chloride. The things that are added to regular table salt are anti-caking agents, so that when you go to a restaurant, the salt that's been sitting there for like 3 months isn't like a big salt lick.
Clunk.
Yeah.
Can I have a chisel?
Yeah, and
Get
so
some salt here.
usually that requires some calcium, maybe some aluminum. So people are not crazy about that. So that reduces the caking, and as well as iodine. So this was designed as a way to supplement in countries where people do not get enough low-fat dairy or seafood, which is a primary source of iodine in your diet.
Can you still bake a cake with anti-caking agents in it using table salt?
Yeah, that's ironic, but yes, you can. So, deep
You
thoughts.
were probably wondering.
Deep thoughts with Paul Zausel. What I would tell you is that the amount of calcium and aluminum from the anti-caking agents is so low that if that's a concern, really the bigger concern is how much salt you're consuming, because for it to be a problem, you need to consume very, very large amounts of salt.
The sodium chloride will get you before the aluminum will.
Okay, so before we go to number 2, let's talk about salt. How much salt are we actually supposed to have?
Not much. Teaspoon a day
A teaspoon, which is 2,300 milligrams.
is not much salt. That's as much, and that's probably already added into the foods that you buy if you're buying any degree of processing in food, because salt was one of the earliest food preservatives.
Yep.
And if you go to a restaurant, you're good for a month. How much salt you get in.
They say certainly in North America that is the number one source of salt is in highly processed foods, and the average consumption is in the 3,500 to 4,000 milligram range, which explains why you have a problem with high blood pressure, heart disease, and stroke, because salt affects these, and we're going to talk about it a little bit after, but it's not just the blood pressure, it actually has specific effects on the vessels as well.
All right, so that's table salt. We're going to move on to sea salt.
C, like the letter C?
No, like where the fish live.
Okay. How do you make sea salt from?
Sea salt is, so there is, as you all know, salt in seawater. So the way we get it is by evaporation. You evaporate the water and it leaves the salt behind, but it also leaves a lot of other minerals and things behind too.
Yeah.
Because it's not just salt that's in the sea.
So the main ones we talked about are potassium, magnesium, sometimes manganese, and potassium itself definitely can have some beneficial effects on your blood pressure when it's swapped out for salt. However, the amount of potassium in sea salt is so very low that it does not make a significant contribution to good health.
Yeah, and more commonly you can get fresh water from sea salt by that same process.
From desalination.
Yeah, evaporate it out and then let the condensate come down.
So you kind of get 2 things. You get, hey, get some fresh water and get some sea salt.
Yeah, glass of water with my fries.
It's a win-win.
Yeah.
Okay, number 3, one of the more common ones you're going to see in the stores is Himalayan pink sea salt. So Himalayan pink salt, sorry, not sea salt, Himalayan pink salt. So it's called that because it's pink because of the iron oxide content, and it can be different levals of pink, even to a dark red, depending on how much iron's in there. And it does look pretty cool.
And you're basically eating rust.
Right, yeah.
Iron oxide, right?
Right.
Some of that rusty salt.
Yeah, and those salt granules are a little more coarse, so it's considered to be a little less processed. And this is mined from a mine, particularly in the Punjab region of Pakistan called Kura. This is where most of it comes from. Again, mostly sodium chloride. There have actually been no randomized controlled trials looking specifically at Himalayan pink sea salt as far as health benefits, but it does look cool, and because it's coarser, sometimes the taste profiles of all these salts are a little bit different because of those extra minerals.
Because of the texture as well. It's a bigger chunk of salt.
Yeah, bigger chunk.
Finer.
Okay.
Finer grade. So that's the rusty salt from the Himalayas.
Rusty salt. And then the last one of the big 4 would be kosher salt. So the koshering process, I actually learned this week, is that it's designed to reduce the amount of blood in the meat. So the animal is sacrificed in a humane and very specific way to drain all the blood. And then the extra blood that lives in some of the vessels is drawn out by the large, chunky kosher salt.
Right.
Yeah. So they put it on the meat and it pulls out the blood.
Right. Osmotic gradients that you set up with that hyper concentrated liquid outside, and that'll draw the fluids out from inside.
Yeah, so large rocks, a saltier taste often prefers for some types of or methods of cooking. But again, the sodium chloride content is about the same, 97 to 99%. Okay, so the last one specifically I talk about is because in the comments, we had done a video before about salt, and we were like, oh no, don't eat table salt, eat Redmond real salt. So this is a brand. No hate to Redmond. I think it's an interesting thing. It's from Redmond, Utah, where there's a prehistoric salt mine that's about 30 feet below the ground where they're mining up all this salt.
It's cool. Got a dinosaur tooth in my salt.
Yeah. And
Prehistoric.
It's pretty cool, and it's very, very unrefined, and they say that there are 60 extra ingredients in it and all types of different trace minerals. What I would say, though, is never been a randomized controlled trial on Redmond salt to show that it is healthier than other salts. Certainly it is less refined, so you could argue that part, but again, we said, unless you're eating crazy amounts of salt, it's probably not going to be an issue. But people feel very strong that this is a healthier way to eat. So it is less processed.
Less processed, but not clinically studied.
Not clinically studied at all.
But anecdotally, you might have a great experience with your Redmond salt.
Yes.
Leave a comment if it's changed your life.
Okay, so what does the science say about salt and its effect on our health, particularly on blood pressure, Paul?
Okay, well, there's a lot of science. Salt, we need salt. We need sodium chloride in our bodies.
We certainly do.
It's crucial to our bodies.
Every
the problem
single
is
cell.
when we get too much of it, bad things can happen.
Okay.
And the most obvious thing is you're going to retain fluid, right? If you become hypertonic, you take too much salt in, you're going to retain fluid. You're not going to be able to get the fluids out of your body, and you might know. Some people might notice swelling of their ankles, swelling up to their knees, edema. Pitting edema, which can happen if you increase your salt intake too much.
Right.
Consequently, you could have hypertension. Right? When you retain all this fluid, it can lead to hypertension. Now, there's special situations, okay, which we will talk about in a sec.
Okay.
But you might have been told, no, eat salt. Your doctor says that because you have low blood pressure, or you have low sodium, and you might be told that you're supposed to eat salt. We're talking about like this in the general population.
Right.
Most people have to be careful because too much salt can retain fluid and increase your blood pressure, for one.
And our bodies are really good at regulating salt primarily by excretion via our kidneys, but that system can be taxed if it's persistently exposed to high levels of sodium. Sodium also has an increased risk of damaging the lining of our blood vessels, so as an independent risk factor outside of blood pressure to increase your risk of heart disease and stroke. So we do have to be careful with the amount. So there have been countless randomized controlled trials and systematic reviews that have shown that persistently elevated salt levels in your diet directly lead to these negative health consequences. This is not negotiable. People are going to write in the comments.
It's a scientific fact.
It's a scientific fact.
And that is a scientific fact, huh?
That is a line from Anchorman, not related to high blood pressure, but it's a good one.
Good movie.
So, in order to combat this, they've done some studies that showed or have looked into whether or not reducing your salt intake can that help lower your blood pressure. So usually, we have recommended guidelines are about 2,300. We found out we are getting in the range of 3,500. Most of the studies target around 1,800, and there's two big trials. One of them called the DASH sodium reduction trial, where they had people to have a DASH diet, so that's like a Mediterranean style diet with primarily or increased amounts of fruits, vegetables, low-fat dairy, as well as 1,800 milligrams of salt. And then there's another one, the TOHP trial, which is a trial of hypertensive prevention, where also they had people taking in about 1,800 milligrams of salt as opposed to regular amount. This was actually in a group of normotensive or not hypertensive people, but it did show that reducing your salt lowered your blood pressure in the range of 5 to 10 millimeters of mercury.
Which is significant. I never add salt. I never add salt to a meal, personally. Like maybe cooking or something like that in preparation. But if I'm sitting there and the plate's in front of me, I never add extra salt.
I would say not very often for me.
Really?
I'd say still a little bit, but not very often.
What do you add salt on?
Like sometimes like a vegetable, like say a potato or like broccoli, sometimes like a little bit of, sometimes a vegetable. It doesn't have a sauce or something else with it. If it's just like steamed or something.
Sure.
Yeah, maybe I'd add it in that situation.
I guess the sauces I use will have some salt in them probably.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and that's where I think your body craves a certain amount. It's all kind of like your thirst, right? Your body kind of knows how much salt you need. So other people are going to comment certainly about something called salt sensitivity. So is everybody the same level of sensitive to salt?
No, it's different, right? Like with everything biologic, everyone is just a little bit different. You might be able to tolerate salt and it doesn't affect your blood pressure that you can notice or get your ankles all swollen. There's other people though who may notice it right away. Yes, I had too much salt yesterday because my blood pressure's up or my ankles are swollen.
Right, so studies have shown that about 50% of people that have high blood pressure are considered salt sensitive. So that means reducing their salt intake is going to drastically reduce their blood pressure in that 5 to 10 millimeter range. and about 25% of people that don't have high blood pressure would find the same benefit. Having said that, if you're not salt sensitive, reducing your salt still will reduce your blood pressure, but it'll reduce it 2 to 4 millimeters instead of 5 to 10.
Less reduction.
Yes, there are specific groups that are prone to being salt sensitive, and that would include people as they get older, certain medical conditions, as well as African Americans are more salt sensitive typically.
Sure. As you get older, you're more sensitive to a lot of things. A lot of deviations in your environment, a lot of deviations in your diet will change things big time for you than a kid, for example.
Okay, so we talked about reducing your salt. Paul, is it possible for you to not get enough salt so your salt goes too low?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
we need salt. It's probably not going to happen to you if you're taking part in the North American diet.
Agreed.
But definitely, if you in starvation situations or malnutrition, for sure you can have too low salt intake, and you can become hyponatremic even, where your sodium level gets so low.
Dangerous.
Which has its own dangers associated with it.
Yep.
So it is possible. However, it's unlikely if you live in this part of the world,
Yep.
North America.
Yep.
Other parts of the world, that may be a risk.
They have done some randomized controlled trials on ultra low salt intake in the 1,000 to 1,500 milligram range. And what they did find was that there was a trend towards increased insulin resistance, as well as elevated total cholesterol and triglycerides. So this drives home the point that our bodies are very good at deciding kind of how much we need. But if you restrict certain critical elements, that this can have negative health effects, even though there can be too much of a good thing.
There is,
Yeah.
and that can happen with just about anything, you know. And
Yeah.
you're saying, oh, you got to go jog every day. You can do too much of that. You can do too much of. That's why some of those diets.
Yes,
that
the
emphasize-
extreme diets, right?
Extreme diets emphasize too much of one thing, which
Yeah.
can be dangerous. Same thing with salt. You have to be careful with it, recognizing that it's in most of the food you eat already.
Yep.
And I think you're at risk more in North America of taking in too much salt and then not enough salt. But definitely, heavy duty restriction of salt can be dangerous as well.
The last thing I would say is about iodine. So some people have concerns that there's iodine added to table salt, but this is actually very intentional, designed to deal with people with deficiencies. In North America, if you're getting seafood or dairy, you're likely meeting your iodine requirements, which is about 150 micrograms per day. However, if you are a fully whole food plant-based eater, you may not be getting enough unless you're eating a lot of seaweed, because most fruits and vegetables do not have a lot of iodine, so you need to be careful for this. If you did use table salt in that setting, 1 teaspoon of table salt has 400 micrograms, so you really need just less than half to meet your daily requirements. But this can lead to things like dry hair, dry skin, a goiter even if you're thyroid, and hypothyroidism. So iodine,
Dry humor.
dry humor. You must have
I
low
need more
iodine.
iodine.
You got a lot.
I
You
need
need
more
more.
iodine.
You definitely
I
need more.
should start adding salt.
So if you are experiencing any of those symptoms and you are someone who may not be getting iodine in their diet, consider the salt, or even talking to your doctor about getting measured. Now you know that's the salt on the salt.
Sodium chloride, those kids in chemistry, we talk about salts. All salts in chemistry aren't
Yes.
sodium chloride, but when we talk about salt in your diet, that's sodium chloride.
Well, except potassium chloride, we talked about that in our
We
other
did as a
video.
supplement.
Swapping that out, that's another option. If you like the taste of salt,
Yeah.
but you don't want the blood pressure effects, sometimes you can swap out the sodium.
Chemically speaking, it's a salt,
Yeah.
but we call it as a salt substitute when you're talking about a diet.
Now you guys know, if you have a comment or had an experience with the salt or high blood pressure or just anything, leave a comment. Let us know. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe to our channel.
And remember, you are in charge of your own health.
We'll see you next time.